with adult hindsight. What was a complete WTF moment from your childhood that you didn't understand at the time? Story 1, when I was 5, we had a lice check at school, and it turned out I had lice. I was sent home and quarantined. All of my bedding and stuffed animals were thrown away, and I couldn't be around anyone. Every morning and night my mother had to use tweezers to pull them and their eggs out of my eyebrows and eyelashes. After about a week of this, a stranger showed up at my house and took me into the living room alone. She showed me a girl and boy doll and started asking me really weird questions about private parts and touching. I was 100% confused. Turns out I had crabs. Since they typically live in pubic hair, and I didn't have any, they decided to live in my eyelashes. My mom thought I'd been molested. In reality, the babysitter had banged her boyfriend on a couch at a different house that I then took a nap on. I want to add that I didn't know the truth until I was about 25. My niece got lice, and I was surprised they weren't in her eyelashes. My mother told me what had really happened, and am still mortified. Edit a word. Edit 2, obligatory thank you. Kind stranger for the gold. Story 2, there was a solid year growing up where my mom, dad, and I ate lots of macaroni and cheese and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I was in little kid heaven. Thought it was the best thing. Never realized we didn't have, and my parents did the best they could to hide it. Story 3, when I was in kindergarten, we had a little bathroom in our classroom, like a supply closet, but with plumbing that we could use so that we wouldn't have to go down the hall whenever we needed to. One day, while I was in there, I realized that there was no toilet paper. My solution was to walk out of the bathroom, pants down, in front of the whole class, and explain to my teacher the situation. In the middle of her lesson, it's one of those memories that makes me physically cringe anytime I think about it. Story 4, my sister would pick fights with me in public, so I started acting retarded, so everyone near her thought she was harassing someone with special needs. I thought it was funny and clever, but I can't believe she didn't get in more trouble. One time this big guy was just like, I think you need to leave him alone. Where are your parents? In a scary, deep voice. Story 5, I think I was 4 or 5. My parents were fighting, which was a pretty common occurrence. But I remember this time my dad yelling for someone to get him a knife so he could kill himself. Not understanding what that meant at the time, and wanting the yelling to stop, I started to go to the kitchen to get a knife until my older brother stopped me. Story 6, when I was about 11, I woke up to my 17-year-old cousin with his out, joking around, and peed on me. Had to promise I wouldn't tell on him. Later in life, realized dude jerked on my head while I was sleeping. Story 7, I would always get mad at my mom for packing me homemade sandwiches. All my rich friends' parents were giving them ramen noodles for lunch, and we would eat them raw and thought they were delicious. I always thought my mom didn't buy me that because she hated me and wanted me to eat boring food. One day, in college, while buying ramen, I recalled this stuff from my childhood. Realized that although we were poor, my mom made me homemade lunches every day, and my rich friends' parents were just sending them off with whatever took the least effort. Story 8, when I was about 6 years old, I picked up a Brazil nut out of a jar and asked my stepmother what it was. She told me it was a toe. When I asked her what it was, she told me it was another word for friend. A couple weeks later, I got chewed out of my mother's house for calling my sister. I was so confused. Story 9, when I was about 7 and my brother was around 4, we were laying in our parents' bed watching cartoons because they had a comfy bed and big TV. I reached under the pillow and I found this weird long pink thing. I found a button on the top of it and it started vibrating. Hey, look, this thing vibrates, I told my brother. Being kids, we just rubbed it all over ourselves and such to feel the vibrations, including putting out mouths. And yes, I threw up in my mouth multiple times while typing this out. TLDR, my little brother and I played with our moms. Edit him getting disturbed by the shocking amount of people suggesting it could have been my dad's. And I'm getting even more disturbed by the amount of people who are asking me to describe the taste of the, and I'm possibly even more disturbed by the fact that my top comment, and growing, is about me putting my mom or dad's in my mouth. Weird day. Story 10, I was placed in foster care at an early age because of abuse, and I had to see a counselor on a regular. This counselor's name was Bryant. Bryant's office was full of interesting things. He had dolls so kids could point to where Uncle Jimmy touched them. He had crayons and paper and all sorts of other. And he had 2 plastic totes full of sand. One was full of wet sand, the other full of dry sand. I'm sure I don't know what the ostensible purpose of the sand was. Moving on, I was 6 when the sessions began, and for nearly a year, I had to see this guy every 2 weeks to tell him how I felt about my foster parents and how was school. It wasn't until many years later that I realized this guy was a pervert. He always locked the door to his office, and then he would pull out the sandboxes and he'd say, pretend we're at the beach. He'd encourage me to take my shirt off because, hey, it's the beach. On a couple of occasions, he tried to give me a massage by pinching my shoulders, but my muscles weren't developed. That hurt. I told him so, and he stopped. And that's it. He never did anything else. A year later, I stopped seeing him when one of his co-workers got in trouble for hiding X-Men cards in his pockets and having my older brothers fish them out. It was like a whole organization of creeps. When it finally occurred to me that this was unusual, I was much older, and it pissed me off because there was this guy fondling helpless victims of child abuse. Fucking Earth. Story 11. My mom has MS and didn't want me and my sister to see how bad it could get when we were little. So we would go to Chuck E. Cheese all day on her worst days during the summer, or if she couldn't cook during the school year, would have Eggos for dinner. Me and my sister thought those days were the coolest things, and so much fun. It took me years to realize she was doing it, so we weren't scared by her disabilities. Edit. Thank you all so much for the kind comments. My mom truly is amazing. Thank you all again. Story 12. I was staying in my sister's apartment complex for the weekend and took her dog out to the parking lot for a walk around 10 p.m. A guy stepped out of his van and started asking me questions. The gist was, does the dog bite? No, some small talk. I live in this van. It is pretty cool. Do you want to come in and see? No. I went back inside and told my sister about this weird guy. She flipped out, told me to stay here, and stormed outside. She came back and said she couldn't find the van. Story 13. Came home from school 4th grade and ran in my room to change into baseball pants and grab my bat bag because I was running late to practice, opened my bedroom door, and my older brother and his girl were banging in my bed. They just told me they got tired and his sheets were washing. I thought nothing of it. Changed, grabbed my bag, and on my way to practice I was none the wiser. Story 14. I was maybe 8 or 9, but we were pretty bad off at the time. I remember sometimes late at night my mom would dress up super fancy, complete with a big trench coat, and she would have me ride with her to random houses and tell me to sit in the car while she went to go see some friends. I'd wait for a while, and then she'd come out and we'd leave, and if I was really good, she'd take me out to dinner the next day. Now, as an adult, in pretty much 99, she was selling her body to make ends meet, which is absolutely horrible, but hot did she do her best to keep me from starving to death. Story 15. When I was pretty young, somewhere around 8 or 10. This was mid-1970s. My folks rented a Winnebago, and we did a trip up the East Coast through Niagara Falls into Canada, and across back out into Michigan, back south to Atlanta, visiting various family friends along the route. While in Windsor, Seattle, we stopped at a KOA, Campgrounds of America, for those unfamiliar, for the night. The place IRC was mostly empty. We parked in a spot, and not far away was another RV with an older gentleman milling about outside. Me being me, I go wander over and say hi. The fellow starts speaking at me, just talking crazy gibberish. I had no idea what was going on. My dad wanders over and magically manages to communicate with the fellow for a minute or two, then leads me back to our RV years and years later. I'm telling someone this weird story, and it hits me off he was speaking French. My dad knew a bit of French thanks to being infantry in eastern France during World War II. Edit. I profusely apologize to many of you for the lack of any molestation in my tale. Story 16. Around 9 to 10, riding my bike through the neighborhood, was about to ride up into my driveway when this guy pulls over next to my bike and waves me over, asks me if I want to ride. I say no, my house is right there. You sure we could throw your bike in the trunk if you're worried about it? Very insistent. Nope, just walk the 20 feet to my front door. 20 years later, and I still wonder if that was just a nice old guy or someone with some sketchy motives. Story 17. When my mom and sister weren't home, me and my dad would play a version of hide and seek, and he would roam the house with a knife in his hand, talking about how, when he found me, he was going to ram it up into my socket, lobotomize me. I loved it. Story 18. I was 6 and my next-door neighbor 5. She walked in on her sister, who was 11, indulging in some adult activity with her teenager boyfriend, and wanted to try said activity with me. So we sat in her garage with the lights off and smashed our faces in each other's crotches. Afterwards, we ran back to my house where my parents were hosting some company, and we quieted everyone down to tell them about how we just had. Story 19. When I was 10 and my grandfather passed away, my mom got into some pretty hard drugs. Whenever she was passed out on the couch or in the kitchen using, her druggy friends would tell me things like, "You look really sexy in those little shorts," or the things I would do to your tight little body. I think I knew it wasn't okay, because it always made me feel sick, but I never told my parents about it. My mom is clean, and those friends are long gone. At this point, it's not something I'd be able to bring up. Story 20. Being shot at by my brother. We used to go hunting together when I was between about 9 and 11. He taught me all about gun safety, how you should never point a firearm at anything but the ground or sky unless you intend to fire it, and above all, never ever point it at a person, not even as a joke. One day, we were out hunting, and I was standing a little way away from him. I looked up to see his pointing his gun at me. I moved to one side, just as he pulled the trigger, and I felt something pluck at the sleeve of my sweater. There was a small hole in the material. I was so confused and asked him why he had shot at me. He laughed it off and said of course he hadn't. He hadn't been shooting anywhere near me. I didn't question it anymore at the time. Now, I think why that was my brother trying to shoot me. It was a couple years after that when his mental health problems started showing themselves. I probably have a couple more WTF moments if anyone's interested. Edit, since I've had so many requests, more WTF stories from my childhood in comments below. Story 21, my doctor would tell me to lie really still, cut my vulva, and listen to my heartbeat. I believe that I saw this doctor up until age 10. If a doctor sees this post and can tell me what he was doing, I'd really appreciate it. Edit, not emotionally scarred. I hope no other children he saw were. If I have children, they will be properly supervised. Yikes. Edit, 2, worrying about other children with parents in the waiting room is going to bug me. This doctor is still practicing at the same location. At some point today, I will figure out who to contact about this. For clarification, he cupped me. Story 22, when I was about 11 and my sister was 14, she came home from a sleepover with a large red welt on her neck. When my mother questioned her about it, she wove an epic tale of a fight amongst friends, culminating in the use of Tootsie Rolls as projectiles. Though she had remained neutral, she was sadly struck in the neck during the crossfire. My mom apparently decided to see how far my sister was willing to take this story. She feigned indignation and said she wanted the phone numbers for the girl that threw the Tootsie Roll and the girl that hosted the party to inform their mothers of the incident. There was talk of cutting those friends out of my sister's life. At the time, I was horrified that that had happened to her. Years later, I realized my mother decided to troll instead of addressing the fact that her daughter came home from a girls-only supervised sleepover with a hickey. Story 23, I genuinely didn't understand why I blushed every time the beautiful young substitute French teacher spoke to me. 3 years later, I realized I like women, somehow missed that I had a massive crush on this lady. ETA, not a huge WTF, but thought some happy ones would be good. More edits, yes. I'm a woman. I was in middle school when I had said teacher. Story 24, when I was little, my mom would ask me daily if anyone ever touched me in a way that I didn't like, or if they touched me in my private areas. I just found out this year, I am 22, that she was molested by her friend's dad when she was 8. She passed away when I was 12, but one of her friends showed me a letter she had written him telling him a bunch of stuff like that. He felt I needed to know, and honestly, I'm glad I know now, because everything with how my mom's side of the family interacts with each other makes a whole lot more sense now, too. Edit, this is now my most popular comment on any Reddit post. Thanks for the upvotes and all the comments, guys. It comforts me and makes me sad at the same time that you guys had similar experiences to that. But I'm also glad you guys and your kids aren't being molested. There's a special place for pedophiles. Story 25, I demanded that my mother made me a little brother when I was 5. I thought that being 5 years older was the perfect age difference because we were close enough in age to play together, but I would be old enough to win any arguments or fights. Story 26, a bit late, but when I was about 5 or 6, I would have put my mom's necklaces on mine and call it my jewelry hanger. I would then parade around laughing at my heart with my mom's jewelry all over it. Now that I am older, I can't help but try to forget it ever happened. Story 27, you guys will barely believe this. When I was young, about 6 to 7 years old, I was sleeping when awoken by bright lights coming through my window. Naturally, I freaked out and woke up my pops. He told me to go back to bed while he investigated. The bright lights kept shining through all of the windows, one after the other in no particular order. At the time, I had no idea what this bright light could have been. It was terrifying. I've literally had nightmares that start out the same way since then. Years later, at my father's funeral, my dad's best friend comes over and starts telling this story from another perspective. He tells me when we all younger and I was cop, I'd fly the police helicopter over to your house and shine the lights on your house to mess with your dad. He'd come outside and moon us. All this time, I had no idea what the bright lights were until then. It all made sense. Our cop friend was using the police helicopter to play with us. I found this out 20 years later. Crazy. Story 28, I had issues around age 5 with poor, but hygiene. I guess I didn't wipe effectively enough. My mom took me to the doctor and got some tips for how to get me to clean better on my own. My mother then explained the new routine. I needed to spread my cheeks wide and rinse in the shower every day. This went on for a few days, and things were clearing up for me. Fast forward to the weekend when my father returns home from a business trip. We spent some father-son bonding time at the gym playing tennis, and afterwards used the communal showers. I was so eager to show my father how well I had been progressing. So I leaned against the wall with my face toward the wall and allowed the shower to flow over my head, land down my back and into my spread-open cheeks. My father was so proud of the progress I had made, and that my hygiene was improving that he wanted me to demonstrate this new cleanliness routine to about 3 other guys he knew at the gym who happened to also be near the shower area. I was so glad my father and the gym buddies were proud of my progress, but thought nothing of it until the memory came back to me nearly 20 years later. TLDR, gave a private show to gym creeps. Story 29. I went to daycare with a girl who was about a year or two younger than myself, and she had an older brother. Everyone bullied her. She was rude and loud, would lie and steal, still went to the bathroom in her pants at 6 to 7. Her brother was held back enough grades that he was in my grade even though he was older. Her family was the trashy family. I remember laughing at her and calling her a liar because she would tell me her brother would hold her down and pee in her mouth, or they would be wrestling and he would pee on her or pin her under the dirt bike and leave her there for hours. God, I feel awful realizing that he was abusing her and I did nothing. It makes it worse that my best friend's dad is on the same roofing team as him, so I have to see him most times I visit. Story 30. I always thought my mom had a bad cough. I would hear her every day coughing in her room. All those late-night trips to Denny's make a lot more sense as a pothead adult. Story 31. When I was 5 or 6, while I was playing outside, some dude on his motorbike stopped next to me and asked me if I want to take a ride with him. Hit a second helm and all. I said no. He asked a few more times and then left. No idea what would have happened if I'd said yes. Nothing good, probably. Story 32. For my 6th birthday, I had some friends over for a barbecue. We were all being rambunctious little boys, running around the garden, pretending to shoot each other, wrestling, rolling around, etc. My dad was setting up the barbecue and somehow managed to burst the lighter fluid bottle and set fire to his arm. All we saw was my dad suddenly rolling around on the lawn, on fire. At 6 years old, my only experience with seeing people on fire was from the A-Team, in which nobody ever actually suffered any serious consequences, and burning people were just part of the background scenery. We all just figured my dad was getting really into our make-believe games, so we were all just cheering and running around him. He's hard as nails, so when he had managed to smother the fire, he just stood up and said back in a minute, kids with a big smile on face, and disappeared indoors. My neighbor came over to take care of the barbecue, whilst my parents went to the hospital to take care of Dad's burns. We all just continued running around, shouting and wrestling like little savages. Story 33. Picking up random objects around the playground to play with in the sand. I picked up a flimsy plastic tube, which I had believed to be a fruit snack wrapper or something of the sort. It was actually a used condom. Without any parents around, I used it to fill sand and throw around. It haunts me to this very day. Story 34. I went over a friend from school's house for the first time when we were like 8, and his family had a room solely with a heaping pile of rotting garbage. Apparently, when they'd peel a banana or open a wrapper, they'd just chuck it in there. Story 35. When I was like 12 or so, my mom took me to a friend's house and left me with a guy I didn't know, and we watched. Never had seen it before and laughed my off. Mom still hadn't come to get me. Later on, the police came in a giant raid to save me, and later on in life, not even a year ago, realized she almost sold me for meth. The people she was with dropped her on the side of the road in an attempt to kidnap me. I look back at that and literally want to cry. My whole childhood was kind of like this, but we're close now, and she's been clean for a few months now. She still relapses here and there and gets shit-faced drunk all the time, but at least she's trying. Edit man, you guys are really nice. 3. Thank you all for your kind words. Story 36. When I was 4 and 5, my dad used to feed me dried spinach when I didn't want to eat dinner. He told me it would help aid my digestion. In my 20s, I was at a party when someone pulled out a baggie of dried spinach and smoked it. Thanks, Dad. Weed is delicious. Story 37. When I was younger, my brother and I used to use those AOL kids and teen chat rooms all the time. We used to get online girlfriends and would talk each other on there. My brother had met this girl that became his girlfriend that apparently like 40 miles north. One day, my brother said his girlfriend wanted to meet him, but wanted to meet him at the store about a half mile from our house we would ride our bikes to. He asked my parents if he could go see his girlfriend the day of, and my parents freaked out and refused to let us even ride our bikes that day in fear he would just ride up anyway. Looking back, my brother was probably going to get taken by some creep. Story 38. I was 6 or 7. My mom woke my brother and I up and told us to get in the car. Seemed strange, but she was totally calm. So whatever, I remember hearing loud noises and yelling, which was not unusual, but it always scared me. I went into the garage and got in the back seat, brother in front. Mom walks out and gets in the car and tells us we're going to McDonald's for ice cream. As we back out, my dad staggers into the garage and throws a beer bottle at the car. It breaks against the ground. I found out many years later my dad got fired that night from a job. He had worked at least 10 years. Story 39. When I was in elementary school, we had a parents' night where all the students had to read a poem for everyone. Much to my parents' dismay and repeated attempts to dissuade me, I insisted on performing my piece on learning the trumpet. Do you know how to blow? Wasn't until many years later why my folks were so mortified that night. Story 40. Growing up, it was completely normal for me to visit Aunt Kay and M. I never questioned why I had 2 aunts on one side of the family living together. It took me until high school to fully grasp that they were lesbians. Story 41, that a group of my neighbors ran a successful prostitution and possible meth ring basically right across the street my entire life. I didn't really get the big picture until I was about 10, but it was literally going on all day, all night until I was at least 21. A daily source of fun was to sit on the front porch and see what idiots actually went in and out of the place on a daily basis. Bonus points if the John's wife crashed the party. Story 42, when I was maybe 7 or 8, I was at the grocery store with my mom. I remember walking down an aisle and coming across a woman who had blood everywhere around her and coming from her vagina. She was sitting on the floor, bursting into tears, and adults started running up to her. I thought she had just gotten her period. It wasn't until I was older I realized she had a miscarriage. Story 43, my friend and I encountered an old guy in a van who had 2 girls our age in the back. We were about 12. One was half naked. At the time, we thought nothing of it, as the girls seemed to be enjoying themselves. No distress, but allow me to elaborate. My friend was autistic and would have loud outbursts in public. One day at a local McDonald's, he has one of these outbursts, and this old black dude sitting in the restaurant got upset. He yoked my friend up against the wall, and in so many words told him to chill out. Fast forward about a week, my friend and I are in a local park on our bikes. We see the old guy in his gold van, and he sees us. He remembers who we are and motions us over. When we approached, he demanded my friend shake his hand like a man, and he apologizes for what happened at McDonald's days ago. At that point, we were both able to see the 2 girls in the back of the van, smiling and giggling. One was put her shirt on. I remember being baffled by her training bra. Story 44, a group of teenage young adult guys came up to my 5-year-old self and my 3-year-old sister in the grass area outside my flat and grabbed us. I remember they had some weapons. Nunchucks is one that sticks out of my head, but a 15-year-old girl we knew grabbed my sister and took her home safety while I was taken into one of the guys' bedrooms, and the door was locked. I was given a pop-up book. I remember it was vampires, and the guy fiddled about on his computer, trying to engage me and get me to play with him, but I refused and ignored him because I was really enjoying this book. He went to the bathroom, and I managed to climb out of his bedroom window and get back to my flat. I missed my lunch curfew, and I got grounded and was only allowed 2 Jaffa cakes when my gran came around later. We ended up moving from that area not too long after. Looking back on it as an adult, it really freaks me out. What almost happened had happened, and I've just suppressed it very well. How I escaped always struck me as very idealistic. Not sure how I would have actually got out through the window at that age. When I asked my mom about it recently, she got quiet and mentioned my dad got very angry when he found out and sorted some things out. Story 45, I found my dad's gun underneath the seat and, without hesitation, pointed it at my sister and pulled the trigger. Pew pew. It was empty, but the thought of what might have happened, and indeed what happens to lots of kids every year, makes me cold and sick at the same time. Story 46, this guy finger banging this lady on top of a huge turtle sculpture at this place called Lake Osceola in New York. I was probably 6 years old. He was laughing at us watching and drinking a beer with one hand, and she was staring at me, and the other kid I randomly was aging with at the time. I just remember thinking it was super unusual and had no idea what I was watching. Story 47, I thought the UB40 song, Make You Sweat, was about being a personal trainer. I don't even know why I knew personal trainers were a thing at the time. Edit not UB40. Inner Circle. Story 48, this is my step-brother. Even though he looks just like me and my dad, my parents adopted him. I cringe to this day at how much that amazed me. Little did I know, parents just didn't want to tell me dad had a kid in a previous relationship. Edit my crazy cake and liquor party last night resulted in this confusing story. So hey race, what happened? My dad had a child with a woman way before my parents met. Later on, my parents had my sister and then me. When I was little, my dad would tell me I had a stepbrother that my mom and he adopted. I was amazed that this random kid my parents adopted looked a lot like me and my dad. When I was about 10, my sister told me the truth and my dad explained the whole story. Now, I realize how silly my parents were and how many adults thought I was a kid for believing it. Grammar, and this probably came up when I was looking through old pictures of my family that consisted of my parents, sister, and half-brother. Story 49, went to show and tell at preschool and asked the teacher if I could sing a song that my dad taught me. I then proceed to belt out rugby men's drinking songs that explain how my father's an Italian, with like a blimmin' stallion and how the hairs on his Dickie Diner hang down to his knees. Bonus points for arguing with my teacher, because I hadn't sung the whole song yet. Story 50, when I was about 6, my mom would try to use code words to her friends when I was around. So that way I wouldn't repeat it. She would talk about how one of her friends had the heebie-jeebies and gave a girl the heebie-jeebies, and now she's really thin and really sick in the hospital. I had no idea what she was talking about. The only time I heard that word from anywhere else was from Scooby-Doo, and that meant the creeps, so I thought that the guy gave the girl the creeps, and then she got really sick. didn't make sense to me. Story 51, I got one. I'm a chick, so this is double weird. I 9 years old was on summer vacation in another state visiting family. I got to go to some kid's birthday party. They had a large, but not deep, blow-up pool. I ended up in the corner, and I was thrusting my pelvis into the corner. The pressure and water current felt good. I turned around and said this was fun. Some of the older kids gawked and laughed at me while pointing and saying things I've repressed. I got out and waited in the driveway till my sisters were done and we could go home. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I was being ridiculed, humped the pool and got made fun of. Story 52, my stepmother, I'm assuming to check my knowledge, asked me if I knew where babies came from. I might have been 6 or 7. I would point to her belly and tell her all I know is that I came from there, and she would chuckle and tell me that I didn't come from her belly. I guess at the time I assumed she was one of those parents that claims storks bring babies, but never gave it much thought until I was a teen. To be clear, she raised me from age 3 to 13 before I knew she wasn't my biological mother. Story 53, when I was around 10, there was this kid at my school a few grades younger, probably about 6, who liked to hang out with me and my friends. He was hyperactive and kind of amusing, but he had this weird fixation on if we were playing a game and one of us fell into the dirt, he'd come over and start us. Once I was standing against a wall, and he just walked over and started grinding on me. This was constant, and it got to the point where we just kind of distanced ourselves from him. We never really thought anything of it, just that this little serial humper and obsessed child was slightly annoying. It didn't occur to me later that a kid as young as 6 should even know what was. We never taught it to him. He was like that when we met him. This wasn't normal childhood experimentation. This kid knew more about than most of us did. I felt sick when I finally looked back on him and realized that something up must have been going on for a 6-year-old kid to be acting like that, like really up. Story 54, so when I was little, our town was hit by a tornado. It was the only cloud in the sky, and it took seemingly forever to get through town. My grandparents came and got us mom, me little sis, and my little cousin, and we drove out of town away from the storm. I had a teacher tell me I was lying about this. But this tornado was unusually slow, and is on record as being unusually slow. My grandpa didn't want his kids to even hear the storm, let alone be caught in it. We watched it from a nearby safe location, and I still remember feeling my heart stop when a landmark near our house disappeared in the storm. My dad hadn't made it home from work. Before we left, we were waiting for him until we couldn't wait any longer, my mom and sister, and I cried all the way home, thinking my dad was gone. When we pulled up the house, and it was still there, and my dad came running out, honestly, it was the best feeling ever, followed by the second best feeling to a 7-year-old when my best friend and her family came running through the backyard, safe as well. My great-grandpa wasn't so lucky, but in those first few minutes, it seemed everything would be okay. He had 2 broken legs. He got blown down the stairs to the basement. House was pretty destroyed. He died less than a year later due to lung issues from a storm. We lost quite a few of the elderly folks to the same thing. Anyway, this was the actual WTF moment. My dad was still at work, mechanic, tow truck driver, and a volunteer fireman when it started, and he booked it home and proceeded to take a shower in the basement bathroom. For years, we gave him about taking a shower during a tornado, then watching the freaking tornado with a towel wrapped around his waist. We couldn't understand why the heck he took a shower instead of taking cover. It became one of those stories we told whenever the topic of the tornado came up. Did you know my dad watched the whole thing with a towel around his waist? Ha ha. Finally, many years later, on the anniversary of this tornado, we were sitting around the table, and the subject came up again. Remember, we had been teasing him about this for 20 years. You want to know why I was taking a shower? They'll tell you why. You don't remember this because the tornado happened and everyone forgot everything else. This kid, Bob So-and-so, was running late on the way to his wedding, and he got hit by a semi at the corner of XXX and Highway. He didn't make it. I was taking a shower because I was covered in fuel and this kid's blood. I knew the water could be shut off after the tornado, and if I didn't get that off, I would be stuck with that smell in my hair and on my skin. That's why I took a shower in the middle of a tornado, and I was watching it in my towel because I was washing a bit, running up to see how much time I had, and running back to the shower to rinse. All of a sudden, we realized what a bunch of we'd been for 20 years. We never teased him a bit about that again. He hadn't even told my mom, because things were crazy immediately, due to my great-grandpa being severely injured and 2 family members losing houses and the whole town being a disaster zone. My dad never talked much about the bad stuff he saw as a volunteer fireman or a tow truck driver when we were growing up. He wasn't one to brag, just do the job, do it well, and move on. As he gets older, he's been sharing more details. It's fascinating and heartbreaking to know what he's been through, and that he carried all of this alone for so long. He's gone into burning houses to find friends failed, because the guy had gone crazy and was in town burning down his bar too, fell through the floor of the funeral home when it burned, and was only saved by his air pack and instinctively sticking his elbows out catch himself. He made his fellow firefighters swear to never tell my mom about that one. So of course they told everyone at his retirement party. He's seen what happens to idiots who drink and drive or ride motorcycles without helmets or protective gear. And since he knows pretty much everyone due to his jobs, many times he's known the victims. The worst was when my sister's best friend's mom decided to drive herself and her 2 young sons off a bridge that had been closed for construction because she didn't want her soon-to-be ex-husband getting custody. My dad never got over that one because they weren't found until the next morning, and my sister's friend died of exposure, not the crash. He unbuckled his seatbelt and died with his head in his mother's lap. That died instantly, killing his brother, and he still wanted her comfort. He was still warm when they got there. My dad wanted to tell my sister personally, so he went to the school and pulled her out of class after briefly telling the office staff what happened. My dad is full of WTF moments where he shielded us from the WTF of his jobs. I'm sure he'll hear more as the years go by. I'm not sure I want to know all of what he's done, but that guy's one tough S. B.